We had just settled into our first-class seats, champagne in hand, when a woman's condescending voice threatened to turn our dream vacation into a nightmare, one that would soon ground an entire international flight. The scent of buttery soft leather and the low hum of the engines were supposed to be the soundtrack to our victory lap. My sister Imani and I had just graduated me with my master's in architecture, her with her law degree. Our parents, as a ridiculously generous gift, had booked us a first-class, 2-week trip to Bali. We'd worked our butts off for years, navigating academic spaces that weren't always welcoming, and this was our reward. We were two young, successful black women ready to take on the world, starting with this paradise island. Imani clinked her pre-departure glass of champagne against mine. "To us," she said, her smile so wide it made her eyes sparkle. "Leaving the stress behind, and finally getting what we deserve." I smiled back, sinking into the plush seat of 1B. "I'll drink to that." The seat was more like a personal pod, a cocoon of luxury I'd only ever seen in movies. I had already arranged my neck pillow and was scrolling through the in-flight entertainment, a giddy excitement bubbling in my chest. We had made it. That's when the bubble popped. A woman who looked to be in her late 50s, with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and a tennis tan, stopped short in the aisle next to my seat. Her face, pinched with disdain, looked from me to Imani, then back again. A man, presumably her husband, hovered behind her, clutching 2 roller bags. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension that sets your teeth on edge. "I think you're in our seats." I kept my smile polite, practiced. This was a dance I knew well. "Oh, I don't think so," I said sweetly. "We're 1A and 1B. The woman, let's call her Brenda, scoffed. Not a small, polite sound, but a full-throated, theatrical scoff. "That's impossible." We are 1A and 1B. Kevin, show them the tickets." Kevin fumbled with his phone, his face turning a blotchy red. Meanwhile, I had already pulled up our boarding passes on my own phone. I held it out for her to see. "See? Brianna Wallace, seat 1B, and that's Imani Wallace, 1A. Brenda barely glanced at my screen. Her eyes scanned over us, taking in our braided hair, our stylish but comfortable travel outfits, and lingered for a moment on Imani's designer carry-on. A smirk played on her lips. "There must be some mistake. Maybe your tickets are for a different flight. Or perhaps you misread the class section." The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. People like us didn't belong here. Imani, who has a much shorter fuse for this kind of nonsense, put her champagne glass down with a definitive click. "There's no mistake," she said, her voice low and firm. "We're in our assigned seats. Maybe you should check your tickets again." By now, a flight attendant had noticed the hold-up in the aisle. She was older, with a tight bun and a name tag that read, "Margaret." She bustled over with a strained customer service smile. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes," Brenda snapped, pointing a manicured finger at us. "These girls are in our seats and are refusing to move." Margaret's smile faltered as she looked at us. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible shift, but I saw it, the moment she sided with them. "Ladies," she said, her tone now patronizing, as if speaking to unruly children, "can I please see your boarding passes?" We both showed her our phones. She squinted at them for an uncomfortably long time. Then she turned to Brenda and Kevin. "And yours, sir, ma'am?" Kevin showed her his phone. Margaret glanced at it for a fraction of a second before nodding. "I see," she said, turning back to us. Her face was a mask of false sympathy. "It seems there's been a system glitch, a double booking. It's rare, but it happens." "So what happens now?" Imani asked, her arms crossed. "Because we're not moving." Margaret's smile tightened. "Well, this couple checked in first," she lied, and I knew it was a lie because we had been at the airport 3 hours early, enjoying the first-class lounge. So protocol dictates that the seats belong to them. But don't worry. We have 2 very nice seats for you in Economy Plus. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. Economy Plus? After we'd paid, or rather, our father had paid a small fortune for these seats. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. It was about the casual, blatant disrespect. No, I said, finding my voice. It came out shakier than I wanted. No, that's not acceptable. We are in the seats we paid for. You can find them other seats. Brenda gasped as if I'd just slapped her. The nerve. Margaret, are you going to let her speak to you that way? Margaret's face hardened. The plastic smile was gone, replaced by a stern, authoritarian glare. Ma'am, I'm trying to resolve this amicably. You are currently delaying the boarding process and creating a disturbance. Now, I can offer you the economy, plus seats and a travel voucher, or I can have you removed from the flight for non-compliance. It's your choice. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. All around us, other first-class passengers were starting to stare. I could feel their eyes on us, the judgment, the whispers. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. They were making a scene, and we were being blamed for it. Imani stood up. For a second, I thought she was going to explode, but her face was eerily calm. So let me get this straight, she said, her voice dangerously even. Because of a glitch that you can't prove, you're asking two black women to give up their paid-for first-class seats for a white couple who are lying about checking in first, and you're threatening to remove us if we don't comply. I am asking you to cooperate, Margaret said through gritted teeth. This is your final warning. I knew we had lost. Arguing further would only lead to security being called, to us being dragged off this plane in shame. Defeated, I grabbed my bag from the overhead bin. The smug, triumphant look on Brenda's face was going to be burned into my memory forever. We were being kicked out. We were being walked off the plane like criminals, down the aisle, past all the staring, silent faces. As we reached the open door of the aircraft, the cold air hitting my face, a wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me, eclipsing the shame. This wasn't over. My dad always told us, never start a fight, but always, always finish it. My hand was already in my pocket, pulling out my phone. Imani gave me a questioning look, and I just shook my head, my fingers flying across the screen to my father's contact number. My thumb hovered over the call button as my foot touched the cold metal of the jet bridge. Margaret stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching to make sure we left. She thought she had won. She had no idea who she had just kicked off her airplane. My fingers were trembling, but my resolve was like steel. I pressed the call button. It rang twice before he picked up. Brianna, honey, aren't you supposed to be in the air? My father's voice, usually a warm, comforting bass, was the anchor I needed. Dad, I said, my own voice tight with suppressed fury. They kicked us off the plane. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Not of disbelief, but of a predator processing information. Explain. So I did. I told him everything, my words tumbling out in a furious rush. The couple, Brenda and Kevin. The condescending flight attendant, Margaret. The flimsy excuse of a glitch. The public humiliation. The threat of being removed. Imani stood beside me, her arms crossed, a silent, seething statue, her eyes fixed on the smug face of Margaret, who was now directing another passenger onto the plane. When I finished, my father didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just asked, in a voice that was terrifyingly calm, "What is the airline and the flight number?" "Global Air, Flight 788 to Denpasar," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "And the flight attendant's name?" "Margaret. I didn't get a last name." "Okay," he said. "Stay exactly where you are. Do not go anywhere. Do not accept any vouchers. Do not speak to anyone until I call you back. I'm handling this." He hung up. Imani looked at me, her brow furrowed. "What's Dad going to do? Yell at a customer service agent?" The hope in her eyes was warring with years of cynicism. "I don't know," I admitted. But he sounded different. A gate agent, a harried-looking man named David, came bustling out onto the jet bridge. "Ladies, you can't stand here. You need to come back to the desk so I can process your new tickets for the back of the plane." "We're not going to the back of the plane," Imani stated flatly. David sighed, the sound of a man at the end of his rope. "Look, I don't know what happened in there, but my screen says your seats have been reassigned. I have 2 seats in Economy Plus and $200 travel vouchers for you. Take it or leave it, but you need to clear the jet bridge. We're closing the door. He was already turning away, dismissing us, when the phone at the gate desk began to ring with an aggressive, piercing shriek. David jogged back to answer it, annoyance etched on his face. "Gate 34B, David speaking." His expression shifted. It was like watching a fast-motion video of milk curdling. His face went from bored to confused to slack-jawed shock. He paled, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the receiver. Yes, sir, I understand. No, of course not. Yes, sir, they are right here. I will get them immediately. Yes, sir." He hung up the phone as if it were red hot. He turned to look at us, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. The dismissive bureaucrat was gone, replaced by a man who looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "Ms. Wallace," he squeaked, his voice cracking. "Ms. Imani and Ms. Brianna Wallace." He was practically tripping over himself as he hurried back toward us. "Please accept my deepest, most sincere apologies. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding." Imani and I exchanged a look of stunned disbelief. What on earth had our dad said? "If you would please come back to the waiting area," David stammered, wringing his hands. "Can I get you some water, coffee, anything at all?" We followed him back into the terminal, the other passengers in the waiting area staring at us with open curiosity. The final boarding call had come and gone, yet the plane door remained open. Then the dreaded announcement came over the PA system, not just at our gate, but throughout the terminal. "Attention passengers on Global Air Flight 788 to Denpasar. We are currently experiencing an unexpected operational delay at the gate. All passengers should remain in the terminal. We will provide an update as soon as possible." A collective groan went through the crowd. Phones came out. People started complaining. And through it all, David the gate agent hovered near us, sweating profusely and refusing to make eye contact. 5 minutes passed. 10. The tension was thick enough to taste. Then we saw him. A man in a tailored dark suit was jogging, almost running, down the concourse toward our gate. He looked important, his face a mask of controlled panic as he barked into his phone. He skidded to a stop a few feet from us, his eyes scanning the area until they locked onto ours. "Yes, Mr. Wallace. I'm at the gate now," the man said into his phone, his voice strained. "I see them. I am personally handling it." "Sir, I give you my word. This will be rectified and the employees involved will be dealt with in the severest of terms. I assure you, heads will roll for this." He clicked the phone off and pocketed it, taking a deep breath before approaching us. His name tag read, "Markham, Director of Operations." "Ms. Brianna, Ms. Imani Wallace?" he asked, his voice drenched in a level of corporate humility I had never witnessed. "My name is Mark Markham. Your father, Robert Wallace, called me personally on my private line." He swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the silent, waiting aircraft. "On behalf of Global Air, I need you to know that this flight is not leaving this gate until this situation is resolved to your and your father's complete satisfaction." The name Robert Wallace hung in the air, but to us it was just Dad. To Mark Markham, Director of Operations, it was clearly the name of a boogeyman who held his career in the palm of his hand. I finally connected the dots. My dad wasn't just a businessman who traveled a lot. He was that kind of businessman. The kind that has the private cell phone number of the Director of Operations for a major airline. A man whose company, a massive logistics and transport conglomerate, was likely one of Global Air's largest and most lucrative corporate clients. "My father called you?" Imani asked, her voice a mix of awe and dawning realization. The pieces were clicking into place for her, too. Dad had always been humble about his work, referring to it simply as moving things from A to B. We had no idea A to B involved a scale that could ground an entire international flight with a single phone call. "He did," Markham confirmed, still looking like he might be physically ill. "And he was very clear. The treatment you received is not only unacceptable, it is a direct violation of our company's values and a profound embarrassment. The flight will not be cleared for takeoff. No one is going to Bali until you are back in your rightful seats and you feel the situation has been handled appropriately." The power shift was seismic. A few minutes ago, we were two humiliated young women being discarded. Now, we were the arbiters of this entire plane's destiny. The whispers from the other passengers changed in tone, from curious to impatient and annoyed. They didn't know the details, only that the two black women who had been escorted off the plane were now the cause of this major delay. Markham gestured toward the jet bridge. "Please, allow me to escort you back on board." As we walked back down the ramp, my heart was hammering. This wasn't just about getting our seats back. This was about justice. The cabin, which had been buzzing with pre-flight excitement, was now thick with disgruntled tension. Every head turned as we stepped back into the first-class cabin. The first person we saw was Margaret, the flight attendant. Her face was a frozen mask of shock and horror. She looked from us to the director of operations standing behind us and seemed to shrink in on herself. Brenda and Kevin were now comfortably settled into our seats, 1A and 1B. Brenda was sipping champagne, a smug, satisfied little smirk on her face. When she saw us, her smirk faltered, replaced by confusion. "What is the meaning of this?" Brenda demanded, looking at Markham. "I thought these two were removed." Markham ignored her completely. His eyes were locked on Margaret. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, but it cut through the cabin like a shard of ice. "Margaret, pack your things. You're off this flight. Your ID and credentials will be waiting for you at the HR office tomorrow morning. You are suspended, pending a full investigation, which, I assure you, will result in your termination." Margaret's face crumpled. The color drained from her skin, leaving her looking old and frail. "Sir? Mr. Markham? It was just a misunderstanding." "I think my ears heard Miss Wallace's father quite clearly," Markham snapped. "You racially profiled his daughters, lied about check-in protocol, and threatened them. Pack your things now." She scurried away toward the galley, her composure utterly shattered. Markham then turned his attention to Brenda and Kevin, his expression one of pure, unadulterated loathing. "And you," he said, his voice dropping another octave, "get out of those seats. Now." Kevin looked like a deer in headlights, already fumbling to unbuckle his seatbelt, but Brenda was not one to go down without a fight. "Absolutely not. We paid for these seats. We have our boarding passes. You can't just—" "Ma'am," Markham interrupted, his patience gone. "I have your PNR right here. You were ticketed in premium economy, seats 14C and 14D. You saw two young women you felt didn't belong here, and you lied, creating a disturbance that has now delayed an international flight by nearly an hour. You have two choices. You can take your assigned seats in the back of the plane, or you can be escorted off this aircraft by security and be permanently banned from flying Global Air for life. The choice is yours, but you have 10 seconds to make it before I make it for you." The threat of a lifetime ban did what common decency couldn't. Humiliated and furious, Brenda and Kevin gathered their belongings, refusing to look at us as they did the walk of shame down the aisle to the premium economy cabin. As they passed, I could hear the whispers and feel the glares from the other passengers, now directed at them. We sank back into our rightful seats. The soft leather felt like a throne. A new flight attendant, young and nervous, immediately rushed over to offer us fresh champagne and a heartfelt apology. Markham stood in the aisle, looking at us with pleading eyes. "Is there anything else?" he asked. "Anything at all I can do to make this right?" I looked at Imani. Our victory felt incomplete. Margaret was fired. Brenda and Kevin were shamed. We had our seats back. But the memory of the humiliation, the feeling of being judged and found unworthy in a cabin full of silent witnesses, still lingered. It wasn't enough. Imani leaned forward. She looked Markham dead in the eye, and the brilliant, formidable lawyer she was destined to become was on full display. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and carrying through the silent cabin. "There is one more thing. We want a full, public apology." Markham looked relieved. "Of course I can—" "Not from you," Imani cut him off. "From her." She pointed down the aisle. Her finger was aimed directly at Brenda, cowering in seat 14C, trying desperately to become invisible. "We want her to stand up, right here in the aisle, and apologize to us in front of every single passenger on this plane whose vacation she has delayed." Markham's face went taut. He'd been prepared to fire staff, blacklist passengers, and offer us a lifetime supply of travel vouchers. But compelling one passenger to publicly humiliate themselves in front of another was stepping into a whole new territory of corporate intervention. He glanced nervously down the aisle at the blonde bob of Brenda, who was resolutely staring out the window, pretending she couldn't hear a thing. "Miss Wallace," he began, his voice placating, "I'm not sure I have the authority to compel another passenger to—" Imani didn't even blink. She held his gaze, her expression unyielding. "You have the authority to hold this plane on the tarmac indefinitely. You have the authority to ban her from your airline for life. Are you telling me you can't make one simple restorative request, a condition of her continued travel, on this flight? The flight she has single-handedly ruined for everyone." She gestured around the cabin, where every passenger was now leaning in, completely engrossed in the drama. They were no longer annoyed at the delay. They were invested. This was better than any in-flight movie. I watched, a proud smile touching my lips. This was my sister, the future litigator, laying down the law at 30,000 feet. Markham saw the steel in Imani's eyes and knew he was beaten. He took a deep, fortifying breath and strode down the aisle, stopping right next to seat 14C. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but firm enough for everyone to hear, "you have one final opportunity to rectify the situation you created. You will stand, you will walk to the front of the cabin, and you will apologize to the two women you harassed. If you refuse, I will have you and your husband escorted off this aircraft right now. Your luggage will be removed, and you will be added to the Global Air No-Fly list. Is that clear?" Kevin, her husband, was frantically whispering in her ear, no doubt begging her to just do it. For a long moment Brenda remained frozen, a statue of petulant pride. The silence in the cabin was absolute. You could hear the faint whir of the air conditioning. Then, with a shudder of rage, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Her walk to the front of the plane was the most excruciatingly bitter journey I have ever witnessed. Every eye was on her, and there was no sympathy in them. She stopped a few feet from our seats, her arms crossed tightly, her face a blotchy, furious red. She started, her voice a strangled whisper. "We can't hear you," Imani said coolly, taking a sip of her champagne. Brenda's eyes flashed with pure hatred. She took a ragged breath and spoke louder, her voice dripping with resentment. "I'm sorry," she gritted out through clenched teeth. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding." "That wasn't a misunderstanding," I said, finding my voice. "You looked at two black women in first class and assumed they didn't belong. You lied to a flight attendant to try and steal their seats. That's not a misunderstanding. That's racism. Say it." The word hung in the air, electric and undeniable. Brenda flinched as if I'd physically struck her. She looked wildly at Markham for help, but he just stood there, his expression implacable. Her last line of defense had crumbled. Defeated, her shoulders slumped. "I am sorry," she said, her voice finally cracking, the fake bravado gone. She wouldn't look at us, staring instead at a spot on the carpet. "I'm sorry for my racist behavior. It was wrong. I apologize. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't heartfelt, but it was public. It was a confession, and it was enough. Thank you," Imani said simply. "You may go." Like a puppet with its strings cut, Brenda turned and scurried back to her seat, burying her face in her hands. The entire cabin erupted into spontaneous applause. People were clapping, smiling at us, giving us thumbs-ups. An older gentleman across the aisle raised his glass to us. "Well done, ladies," he said with a wink. The shame and isolation we had felt earlier was completely washed away, replaced by a profound sense of vindication and, strangely, community. Markham walked back to us, a look of immense relief on his face. "Ladies," he said, "the captain has been cleared for pushback. As a further gesture of our apology, your entire trip, the flights, the five-star hotel, everything has been taken care of by Global Air. Please enjoy Bali, and know that you will always have a home with our airline." As he walked away to finally get the flight moving, my phone buzzed. It was a text from our dad. "Is everything okay now, sweetie? Land safely." I typed back, "Everything is perfect, Dad. Thank you. We'll call you when we land." The engines finally roared to life and the plane began to move. Imani leaned over, clinking her glass against mine again. "To us," she said, her eyes shining with tears of relief and pride. "To us," I replied, my own voice thick with emotion. We looked out the window as the ground fell away, leaving the drama and the ugliness behind. We were two young, successful black women, and we had done more than just take on the world today. We had made it a slightly better, more just place, one grounded airplane at a time. Bali was waiting, and our victory lap had never felt so sweet.